All right, folks, welcome to Nino's Corner.tv. I hope this makes YouTube. Gotta watch what we say here. I'm with Peter Navarro, and I gotta tell you, Peter, you are a patriot. I really commend you in your efforts. You've done amazing things for this country, and I know you were treated very, very unfairly. So first, I just want to get that off my chest and tell you thank you,
Sure.
sir. And thank you for joining Nino's Corner.tv. You were quoted as saying, "We are not competing with Chinese companies, we're competing with the Chinese government." Um, Everything that's happening today, to me, seems like a communist agenda, right? And everything that we're seeing happening right now, especially at the southern border, um, I got word from Border Patrol, ICE, they're friends of mine here, telling me, man, there's a lot of Chinese coming over here. There's a ton of them coming over here. Um, would you agree that we are basically being invaded?
Yeah, I think it's useful to look at how long I've been on this issue. I go back to about 2003. I was teaching the University of California in Irvine, MBA students in these what they call the fully employed program. And I began to notice that they were losing their jobs, and I couldn't quite understand it because Orange County is like a robust employment market. Um, and dug a little deeper and quickly discovered that all roads led to Beijing. Now, historically, that was 2 years after Bill Clinton led China into the World Trade Organization. And once they did that, China had free access to our markets. They promised to play fair, and the carnage that ensued is unprecedented in world history. I mean, they basically turned themselves into world economic and military power by destroying American factories, exploiting markets, and using the consumer dollars of Americans to build up their military. And shame on us. I've been following this issue. Fast forward to the Trump administration, I was one of only three people there in the senior advisors who's with the president in all 4 years. And among other things, I was part of the team that crafted the Trump tariffs on China, which basically are our best defense against counterfeiting, piracy, currency manipulation, state-owned enterprises, dumping, all the stuff that they do. Now, to your point, you're right there in El Paso. A lot of stuff's coming across the border. Yes, there are military age males likely sent over by the People's Liberation Army to infiltrate our country. They're coming over. They're coming over by the hundreds,
Oh,
if
I,
not
I see. I see
thousands.
them jumping the fence. I see them here. I'm actually watching
Yeah.
them like acrobats jump over the fence. I couldn't have done this in my prime in boxing. Jump the fence and land on their feet, and then play Frogger through the freeway, and then make it across. It's insane.
Yeah,
These
that's
dudes are
amazing.
very
Yeah.
athletic.
Yeah, I mean they're trained military agents, and I imagine they're dressed well and they have good backpacks and things
I
like
wouldn't
that.
say they're dressed well. They look like, if I had to guess, MS-13, a lot of them. When I looked at one that crossed the jumped the fence and he looked right at me, dead in my eyes. He had tattoos all over his face, and he looked at me like a stone cold killer.
Well, there's a lot of those coming too. Um, but the bigger problem now with China, besides that coming over the border, is all the fentanyl. Number one. Number two, um, to the extent that Trump cracked down on China with tariffs and things like that, um, China has been using Mexico as a third-party gateway into the U.S., setting up their supply chains, their factories, and ship over. I want to point out at this point, because we are in the election season, and my mission right now is to get Donald Trump back in the White House. And the way I'm trying to do that, I've got this new book. It's called the New MAGA Deal. I might just for a minute, newmagadeal.com is the website. It's actually published by Don Jr.'s publishing house. I'm honored for that. There's 37 chapters in here. A number of them are on China. 100 Actions in 100 Days, newmegadeal.com. You can get the book on Amazon and Barnes and Noble as well. But for me, what's important is to have these discussions now, at least till November 5th, within the context of the battle that's going on in the ring between Kamala Harris and Tim Walz on one side, it's tag team wrestling, and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance on the other side. And if you simply look at, if China is your issue, you simply look at all the stuff that Donald Trump did in the White House to fight China with the tariffs, the investment restrictions, and all of that. And then you add J.D. Vance. People need to understand, if they read his book, Hillbilly Elegy, which has sold, I don't know, millions of copies now, it was a movie and things like that, they'll understand that this is kind of interesting, while I was like up at 30,000 feet looking at the communist Chinese invasion of the American economy as an academic, as an economist, as an analyst, I'm looking down and there's like these specks on the ground in across the Rust Belt. And, one of them was J.D. Vance as a young man, very young, young teenager, kid. His mother, his father, his friends, his community getting hammered. So J.D. Vance and I, along with President Trump, have this shared experience and understanding of viscerally of the damage that communist China can do just on economic grounds alone, never mind how they're weighing and measuring our power plants and our subway systems for cyber attacks and infrastructure attacks. Never mind that. So you look at Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, the ticket on the other side. Kamala Harris, what I do know is that she doesn't have any competence with respect to issues related to China. So you can't have any confidence that she'll intelligently defend this country against China. And Tim Walz, what we know about him is frightening. And this is a guy who, in his early years, when he's a high school teacher,
he took many trips to China, right? He's
yeah,
gone
the
back
way
and
it
forth to China.
works, here's the way it works. There's a playbook. The way the Chinese get you here is they either have the honeypots or the money pots. The honeypots are when they get that women to sleep with the politicians, like the guy in California. But they sleep with the American politicians. They get secrets. That's the honeypot. But the money pot is really interesting. Like literally thousands and thousands of Americans have been compromised in the academic community, the journalistic community, the politicians, by offers of communist China to bring them over to the mainland, put them up in fancy hotels, wine and dine them, and in some cases give them jobs. And that's what happened with Tim Walz. It started with paying, communist China would pay for the trips of his entire high school class to go over there, and for him as well. And then that escalated into paying for him and his wife to have a fellowship at a think tank. And what they're trying to do there is create essential candidates who will go back to the United States and not see any of the evils of China. And Tim Walz,
basically sell out the United States.
Sell us out. Do you know what date? A famous date in modern Chinese history that Tim Walz decided to get married on. It wasn't an accident. Do you know what the date was?
No, sir.
It was the day of the Tiananmen Square massacre.
Wow.
Okay? Think about that. The vice presidential candidate, Tim Walz, thinks it's a good idea to get married on the day of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Not as a protest against it, but as an embrace or celebration. I mean, you can't make that up.
No.
That's who we're up against. So Yeah, look, I don't get scared easy, but it frightens me watching how the legacy media has put this bubble around Kamala Harris and Walz, very protective bubble, just as they did Joe Biden. They hid his obvious mental degeneration and physical degeneration from us for more than a year. And then when it was convenient, they exposed it and took him. And his comments, I'd like, if you were just listening to me and you're like, oh, wow, that sounds like extreme. It's like, well, but it's the truth. I mean,
Yeah,
Tim
I
Walsh,
would. I
high
always said
school
that.
teacher, Chinese communists like paid millions of dollars to him over the years to wine and dine and feed him and nurture him. And it's like now he's a heartbeat away, possibly, from being president.
I've always said
Okay.
that. Yeah, I've always said that Joe Biden was the CCP Trojan horse, right? He's going to bring it all in, and
Yes.
that's what we're seeing right now with Kamala. This is a communist Marxist agenda. Now, I understand you wrote the book Death by China. Was that the sole reason that Trump hired you onto the cabinet, or I'm sure there was a lot of other factors that played in, but that was a major
Well,
stake in.
interesting. Yeah, interesting enough. I wrote a trilogy of China books. The first one was in 2006, the Coming China Wars. I happened to predict in that China would create. I kind of got that right. And then 5 years later, I did Death by China. There's a movie that goes with it. It's on YouTube if you want to watch it. It's free. And then I did Crouching Tiger, which took on the military dimensions of that. And so it was actually the first book, The Coming China Wars, that Donald Trump saw, said it was one of his top 10 China books. I saw that and reached out to him. And that's how our relationship began over the years. And so when he decided to run for president, it was, hey, can I help you out?
So it's not a matter of are we going to war with China? We are at war with China, and it's
right.
not a matter of if and when it goes kinetic. Would you say? I mean, we hope it does not, but it looks like, I mean, with all the military bases they're putting up, they're putting it in our backyard. I know that they're in South America. All the Chinese nationalists that are coming through the borders right now, it sounds to me like there's an invasion happening, and they're buying a lot of time. They got a
Yeah.
lot of time on their side with Biden being in office, and then they're hoping on Kamala. It's no secret, at least not to my audience, that we know the CCP was partly. How are we going to stop this from happening? I've heard from some people that I have on as guests that we're looking to pull the reins in 2024, get the election, and then inevitably, we're going to be smacking China with tariffs. There's some executive orders that Trump signed that'll hurt China. But inevitably, we're going to be probably going to war with them. Would you say so?
Well, let
Kinetic,
me
at least.
let me say it's worse than everything you described. Again, I want to
It's
reference
worse
the
than
new
what I said.
magazine because there's a chapter in here. It's the next to the last chapter, and it's about how we're now in a race to the moon with China. I mean, JFK decided to put a man on the moon. It took 8 years, and we got him up there, right? But we haven't been back since. And what's going on now is, by the way, 𝗏megadeal.com if you want to see the book, Amazon or Barnes and Noble. But what's going on there is that China is scheduled to get there by 2030. And Donald Trump had us getting there by 2024 now. But then Biden and Harris took over. I don't know if you know this. A lot of Americans don't, but there's a thing called the National Space Council that Kennedy
I've heard of
set
it.
up, and it's supposed to be the organization that guides our entire space strategy and program. It's overarching over NASA. And by law, the vice president of the country is the chair of the National Space Council. So for the last 4 years, who's been the chair? Kamala Harris. And if you kind of look at what's going on with our space program, the first thing you're going to notice is there's 2 astronauts missing on Earth. They're stuck up on the space station. And that's not an accident. That's part of the Kamala Harris lack of leadership, allowing Boeing to do what it did, which is to say, not run a very good program.
But isn't Elon Musk? Aren't we going to work with Elon Musk to bring them back?
Yeah, and that's the you can't. The Boeing Starliner can't even bring them back. They're going to have to send up one of Elon's SpaceX capsules. But my point is that if communist China gets to the moon before we do, they're going to like rope off territory. There's a lot of valuable minerals that can be mined there. Of course, it's the strategic high ground to fire missiles and things like that. And they're not, so my point is that they're not just going after us in our markets. They're capturing the resources around the world. They're not just stealing our intellectual property. They're not just getting ready to attack our satellites in space or our subway systems if they invade Taiwan and we protest. They're also trying to seize that strategic high ground. And Trump, to his credit, totally reinvigorated that Space Force. It's the one thing Mike Pence did pretty well at the White House, because the vice president's chair of the Space Council. Trump told him, hey, let's get Artemis going. That's the moon program. We need to go up to Mars and do some experiments up there, push that along. But the moon is much more important than Mars. You know, Mars is like nice to talk about and think about, but the moon is much closer to the Earth, and therefore it's much more dangerous from a military point of view and much easier to get minerals back here from space that could help us out.
You know, and I have a problem believing in the whole 1960s moon landing, but that's just me. Like, why didn't we go back? But that's just my thing.
Yeah.
But let's talk about for a second, you know, the first things that Trump will do in office if he gets in conventionally, if he gets voted in. You know, let's say that the Democrats, you know, they don't cheat or they don't cheat big enough, and Trump gets in. What are some of the first things
Well,
that you're
again,
gonna?
I mean, new MAGA deal. The subtitle is interesting. It's the unofficial deplorables guide to Donald Trump's 2024 policy platform. 100 actions in 100 days. You're correct, sir, that most of these things have to be done by executive orders and presidential memoranda because it just simply takes too long and it's difficult to pass laws. But I mean, for example, you can guarantee that Trump's going to be much more aggressive about his tariff policy. I had as one of my remits the whole Buy American thing, and I'm sure we'll be very aggressive about that because that brings our supply chains and jobs on shore economically. If you look at some of the social issues, he's going to get men the hell out of women's sports. You can take that to the bank. And just everything in between. I mean, that border is going to be secured immediately. And once it's secured, deportations are going to start. And they're going
what is mass?
Everybody who came over under Joe Biden is back where they came from.
So when Trump gets in, and I said it looks to me like he's just gonna, if he gets in conventionally, he gets voted in, they're gonna stop him at every move he makes with lawfare and this and that. The Democrats are gonna throw every obstacle at him. And I understand that he's going to smack down tariffs. I understand a lot of the things that he's going to do, but what does a mass deportation look like? Like, how would they even go about this? Because I've heard the number of
let me
immigrants
say
here in
this.
America are like 30 million.
In November, it's important not just to put Trump back in the White House, but we have to build a majority in the House of Representatives. It's very narrow now, which makes it pretty squishy. And then we have to take back the Senate. If we can control the White House, the House of Representatives, and the Senate, then we can also begin to take back the judiciary, because the Senate confirms judges. If you look at my case, where, as many of your viewers know, I went to prison for 4 months in defense of the constitutional separation of powers and executive privilege. I was called to testify before Congress. President Trump invoked what's called executive privilege, which goes back to the days of George Washington. Once he did that, it was my duty to refuse to testify. I wound up in prison for that, the first person ever charged with that alleged crime. But the point I want to make here is that every person who is responsible for putting me in prison is a Democrat, which is to say they weaponized all three branches of our government. It was a Democrat majority voting along party lines that held me in contempt in the House. It was a Democrat attorney general and a Democrat prosecutors who indicted and prosecuted me. It was a Democrat judge, 𝗬𝗵𝗶𝗹, his name, 𝗬𝗵𝗶𝗹 appointee. He stripped me of every possible defense before my case even got to a jury, and the jury itself was Democrat. So, I mean, you have to understand that unless we control all three branches of government, their government's going to control us. I don't know.
I mean, the Republicans are just as dirty as the Democrats.
What's that?
I mean, the swamp is on both sides of the aisle here. I mean, they're just as dirty as the Democrats.
Well, you do have what's called the Uniparty, but what we're trying to do is get Trump Republicans back in the House of Representatives. It's much more difficult in the Senate. The Senate, there are a lot of rhinos in the Senate, but I think if Trump wins a solid victory and we take back the House and build that majority and we get the Senate, we've got a really good chance of advancing an agenda which will bring this country back from the brink Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have taken it to.
So obviously we know, and I know they're going to try this again in 2024. And I believe this is going to be too big to rig for 2024. So would that lead them to resort to other tactics, like let's say a halt in the election, call in the military? Could they activate certain immigrants that have crossed over, causing chaos? I've heard that there's military-grade weaponry coming over the border, that a lot of these immigrants will be activated at the right time to stir up some kind of chaos. We could be looking at a black swan event that could happen before the election. I mean, they're liable to try anything for panic moves before the election or during the election if they know they can't bag it. Do you agree with that?
Look, between now and election day, stuff is gonna happen. The Middle East is a powder keg. I think the war is escalating. And I mean, you're seeing Ukraine now being able to reach deep into Russia, and that's going to provoke a response. You've got the Chinese circling around Taiwan. You've got the Iranians to the Trump campaign to try to defeat him in the election. There's just a lot of things going on. I think
they're here within our borders. The Iranians, the Hezbollah, Hamas are here in our borders. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, a lot of things.
Let's be clear who's responsible for this. It's Kamala Harris.
Right.
Kamala Harris, she was given one significant job by Joe Biden. One. That was to go down and secure the border zone. She blew him off. We got, I don't know, 8, 10, 12 million illegals or more.
I've heard upwards
flooding our labor markets, stealing black, brown, and blue-collar American jobs, bringing in fentanyl, the drug cartel. You know, what Donald Trump talked about back in 2016, it was like, oh, that's racist. Oh, that's you just read the New York Post every day, and you got like too many examples already of this. Just brutal things going on. I mean, the Statue of Liberty It's like we welcome the poor, huddled masses, right? Biden, Kamala Harris, they're welcoming the world's worst trash. Right?
Right.
They're emptying prisons in the Congo and sending him here. It reminds me of the Mariel boat lift that Castro pulled up. I mean, this just, so I think, look, your audience, here's what I would ask of them. You got to make sure you vote, and you can't wait till election day. You got to vote in early voting or absentee to make sure your ballot gets in. Because if you wait till election day, one of the tricks they pull is to create long lines or shut the precinct down or whatever. So that's your first. If you want a country again, you've got to vote. So get out there early and do that. Now, if you got some time after that, you may not. I mean, everybody's working pretty hard just to make a living these days. But if you got time, volunteer at the local Republican Party or at the precinct level or whatever, and get involved. And then make sure your friends and family vote. Get them down to the polls. And that's all we can do at this point. We got to make sure that people understand what Kamala Harris stands for and what she's trying to run away from. And again, you know, I'm just plugging this thing. This is the secret of platform life. The new MAGA deal, newmagadeal.com. It's Don Jr.'s publishing house. It's 100 actions in 100 days, 37 chapters. And by the way, about half of the chapters are written by folks who used to be in the Trump administration. Guys like Rick Grenell, who was in charge of a lot of our national security stuff, Rose Vogt, the budget guy. And I'm hoping information is power. I think we beat them on policy. But, you know, you're a fighter, and sometimes these people, they hit you below the belt.
You hit them right back below the belt. Let me
stuff.
ask you this. Let me ask you this. I was born and raised in El Paso, so I was born in Ciudad Juarez. I was raised on both sides, Ciudad Juarez, El Paso. I know a lot what goes on here on the border. How are we going to handle or dismantle the cartels? I mean, they're operating on both sides here now. I mean, I've heard of cartel kill teams. I've heard of this. I've heard of that. I'm not sure of how you deal with cartels because I mean the fentanyl itself, the human trafficking. How are we going to get the cartels? How are we going to send them back over to Mexico? How are we going to get Mexico to cooperate with such a massive, monstrous problem? Because cartels run the government.
Yeah,
So, and
that
you know
is.
they're rampant in Arizona. They're rampant all over Texas. I mean, they're on both sides of the border. They run everything.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
how are we going to deal and dismantle the cartels? And I'm sure it's in your book, but maybe you could just touch on it a little bit with me and my audience.
There is a chapter on the cartels in the new MAGA deal, newmagadeal.com. Look, the first step is to secure the border. How are we going to make Mexico do that the same way we did it the last time? I was there. I helped craft the policy. It's like we threatened them with tariffs for 24 hours. The liberal media's heads exploded, and Mexico, within 24 hours, sealed the border, sent 20,000 troops to it. And then we parlayed that into safe third nation agreements with Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And it done. It was done. We'll do it that quickly again. That's the first step. If the cartels can't move back and forth, that's the first step in doing it. And then you gotta get the FBI involved. You gotta, and where they're in Mexico, you gotta get involved and just
I'm just
go
saying. I
about it.
mean, I
But
know that.
you don't explain how you're going to do it publicly. That's
Right, I
not.
get you. I totally understand that. And I feel like Trump has got to be able to do what he needs to do to clean up the government, clean up the three-letter agencies, clean up the cartels. He's got to be able to do it without anybody reining him in. And that's just my view on this. And I just got to say that you're going to be in his cabinet, correct? And you'll be
Well,
involved
no, I'm
working
not.
as a
Look. I wasn't looking for a job in 2016. I'm not looking for one now. I think the worst thing to do is look ahead of November 5th. I don't do that. I don't need a job. And what I want to do, what I'm working towards, my mission now is just to win, baby, on November 5th, and to win fair and square using public policy arguments to show that the Trump White House will do a far better job on the things that matter to voters. That's the economy and inflation. That's the border. It's law and order. That's strategic energy dominance. And that's getting all this woke shit out of our schools, our corporations, and our government.
What about fixing 2020? What about going back and
Let's
fixing
win
that?
2024.
Okay.
Let's just get that done. I mean, look, I think the people who need to be held the most accountable right now, if Trump wins, are going to be Merrick Garland and Jack Smith at the Department of Justice, Fani Willis in Atlanta, Alvin Bragg and Juan Marchand in New York. These people are guilty of treason because they are interfering with the 2024 election. And that goes right back to the Harris-Biden White House. So
And
that's what I'd focus on in terms of if we let them get away with what they're getting away with, they're going to continue to weaponize the government whenever the Democrats hold office. And I went to prison so you won't have to. That's what I said at the Republican National Convention. What I meant by that simply is that, hey, look at what happens when they control all three branches of government. They can put somebody in prison for defending the Constitution, and that should frighten everybody.
what's your thoughts on RFK and Tulsi teaming up with Trump?
Well,
They,
there's an article should be out today in the Washington Times, which goes through that. And again, I don't know. I think I did a pretty good job with this because there's a chapter in this book that's titled "President Trump Will Make America Healthy Again." MAGA goes Maha, make America healthy again. And why am I saying this? Because RFK's whole thing is improving the health of the American population, in particular our children. And he believes that a combination of the big pharma medicine poison that they purvey and a lot of the big food companies which sell us all the poison, the processed foods, have led to epidemics of autism, diabetes, heart disease, obesity. I mean, look, over half of Americans now are obese. Over half. I can't
yeah, you know
even.
what's funny, but you know what's crazy? Not funny about it, but what's crazy about that is I was just in California in Santa Monica, and I was staying at an old hotel, and I saw pictures from the 1950s of people on the beach. Everybody on the beach was thin, in shape,
Yeah,
muscular. And now you go on the beach and everyone's diabetic and overweight. You know, it's crazy to see. America is very, very sick right now in
it's
more ways than one.
frightening.
Oh, it's
And
very frightening.
it's easy to blame Americans, but the problem is the people they're being fed this steady diet of processed foods, and you know what? The lower income families and children are the ones that big food particularly targets. I mean, it's like so. Point is, Bobby Kennedy Jr. marrying that interest with Donald Trump, who is very concerned about it as well. That's the importance of the RFK Trump alliance because they've made common cause around a set of issues, make America healthy again, which I think will appeal greatly to a wide swath of Americans, including a lot of swing voters.
So before I let you go, sir, and I'm going to be careful about your time and respectful about your time,
Yeah.
it's not would is it if anybody gets anything out of this, our biggest enemy right now is CCP, is China, correct? And it's not a matter of if but when. We are already at war with them, but could this go kinetic? Is it a matter of when and not if?
I think if there's war, it'll look a lot different than any war ever has. Um, an logical scenario would be Taiwan moving Communist China's moving on Taiwan across the Taiwan Strait.
Or
Might
hacking
do
our
that.
election
They
or
might
cyber
do
attack.
that when there's a war that breaks out where Israel's having to defend itself against Iran and its proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. Okay, so that's going on. You've got the Ukraine thing going on. You've got the drawdown on the American arsenal to perilous levels. China makes its move. We send our aircraft carriers over there. Okay, then what?
Yeah.
I think what you would expect is attacks, cyber attacks on our infrastructure. I think that's where they start. They knock out our power grid. They knock out some of our transportation. And then they'd see if we would back off.
Could they
The danger
maybe?
there is that if the aircraft carriers are in the area, they might take one of those out with a missile and 5,000 souls go to the bottom of the South China Sea. And then America has a real decision.
Do you think a plausible move that China would make cyber attack?
Well, they're already messing with us. I mean, they don't want Trump in. I mean, there's a good argument that the virus itself was designed to undermine Trump and successfully did. And I still haven't ruled that out. But you know, like they're already playing. I mean, all this stuff is going on as we speak. I mean, you know, you saw the Iranian breach at the Trump campaign. They tried to get they got some documents. Press wouldn't print them, but that's the game they're playing. I guess
so basically,
for viewers and listeners, for me, all I'm asking, check out the new MAGA deal, the newmagadeal.com. Go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Educate yourself on what the key issues are, what the differences are between Trump and Harris on the economy, inflation, the border, foreign policy, crime in the cities, strategic energy dominance, and all the woke stuff. And at the end of that, you certainly should vote for Trump, but you'll also be able to talk to people out there who are undecided about the election. So become an ambassador for Trump and just make sure you vote. I mean, too many people.
I agree. So I
They don't
confidently
walk the walk.
I could confidently say that we are at war with China. It's just not being fought with tanks and bombs just yet,
Yeah.
and missiles.
Yeah.
All right. You know, I appreciate you, Peter. Thank you so much
All right,
for
man.
joining me.
Keep
You
taking
take care
care
of
of
yourself,
yourself,
and thank you.
brother.
You're a true
Safe down
patriot.
there on the border. Every town's a border town, but your town is a border town.
I'm at ground zero. You take care of yourself, sir.
All right, good to talk to you. We'll see you again, brother.